I'm here to help you.
Why?
Because someone needs to show you what the true face of your enemy looks like.
I already know who they are. It's just taken me a while to do something about it.
You've accomplished nothing. For all your power, you still don't understand how this podcast works.
What's happening, Hellspawn? Welcome back to Spawnography, the one of the Spawn podcasts of all time in your ears right now. I'm your host, George Marston, they, them, she, her, along with, as always,
Pierce Line, they, them.
Pierce. You just got back from the Berlin Marathon.
I did.
Where you won the marathon, right?
I won the whole thing.
That's right.
Yeah, actually, it's been really funny because you do get a medal and it is gold.
Wow.
And it is fancy looking. It's pretty big. I could show it to you. I don't know where it is, but it's funny. Once you get the medal, unless you have somewhere exactly to like display it, like I just have a bunch of medals in a drawer.
I know you did tell me you set your personal record.
I did. I set a personal record by 20 minutes, which was pretty amazing. I ran a 2:55:53, which is pretty good. That is good for 3,309th out of 58,240 runners. So
wow. If I could do fractions, that'd be incredible, but that's pretty good. I mean, that is pretty high up there. That's great.
Yeah, top 10%. So that's cool. Cool city. Love Berlin. Went to some cool comic shops.
I'd love to go there. I've never been overseas, but someday I'll get there. Oh, I heard that Desert Island is in trouble.
I know they're not going to be allowed to stay at their location in Williamsburg, which is a real bummer. The landlord who is pushing them out, this goes to show you can't operate like without leases and things. Like it's like ultimately, unfortunately,
it seems good until, as we've learned in discussing Spawn, in fact, operating these high money dealings without contracts can often leap up and bite you in your ass pretty hard.
It turns out that the liquor store on the corner.
Oh, I know that liquor store.
Yeah, they are buying this. Like they put in a bid for like twice what Desert Island pays in rent.
Well, fuck that. I saw they have a GoFundMe. If that's still going by the time people hear this, definitely go check that out. Desert Island is a cool store. They carry a lot of independent comics, a lot of local comics, and I always stop in there when I'm up in New York. So
yeah, definitely one
to see another small shop like that close.
Yeah, definitely one of the best shops in the city. One of the only shops in Brooklyn altogether, really. And, this has been a rough year we're losing the Joseph Koch warehouse by the end of the year. We're losing Desert Island by the end of the year. So by the time anybody hears this, it won't be closed yet. If you get a chance to visit, please do. If the GoFundMe will probably still be up. They're hoping to find another location. They're not looking to stay where they are because, it probably really is only a matter of time. Even if they were able to stay,
managed to pay twice as much.
Yeah.
Which is a bad deal. So yeah, that sucks. I'm just sitting down here. We had a hurricane come through. We're okay, but of course, Western North Carolina and a lot of Appalachia was sincerely devastated. A lot of people I know had their towns just literally wiped off the map by floods.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's been a lot. So I'm glad to get back into something lighthearted like the war between heaven and hell as we get back into this podcast because it's been quite a week,
Yeah, 100%. And one of my dogs passed today as well. So
I saw that.
Having a rough day, but It's okay.
I'm
I
sorry to
mean,
hear
he
that.
was
R.I.P.
old.
to one of the greats.
Yeah, Baru.
Yeah. Let's get into the credits for Spawn number 61.
Hell yeah. So this is Image Comics Presents Sanctuary, story by Todd McFarlane, pencils by Greg Capullo, inks by Todd McFarlane and Chance Wolfe, copy editor and letters by Tom Orzechowski, colors by Brian Haberlin and Dan Kemp, dedicated to Mark Dipe, who is
Okay.
the director of the movie Spawn.
Oh, okay. Speaking of Image Comics, I know we just did the credits, but if we can back up for 1 second, there's two
We
things we need to
absolutely can.
discuss. Because Rob Liefeld is relaunching, his claims says, has announced. Rob Liefeld has announced that he is relaunching Youngblood for Image Comics, but he's doing it in partnership with his apparently longtime business partner, which I didn't realize, Scott Mitchell Rosenberg. Do you know who he is?
He's a Malibu guy, right?
He is, yes, he is my archenemy because, once again, the opinions expressed in this podcast are reflective only of my own and not my employer, Newsarama, Games Radar, Future Inc. Uh, I say that semi facetiously. I don't know. I'm sure he's a guy. No. The disclaimer is real. Him being my arch enemy is semi facetious. Because supposedly, reportedly, his contracts with Marvel over the sale of Malibu are so Byzantine and so weighted in his favor monetarily that they'll never reboot the Ultraverse because the monetary gamble would be so high that basically it would all go, anything they make would go into his pocket. Is the working theory.
That's the prevailing theory. Listen, I hear that they're announcing Jonathan Hickman relaunching the Ultraverse at New York Comic Con this year. So
That'd be
that's a joke
incredible.
because by the time that this comes out, New York Comic Con will have happened. But
That would be my absolute dream. Every time I've had an opportunity to get close to asking about the Ultraverse at Marvel, I've done it, and every time the answer is no fucking way. I can barely even talk about this because there's literally an NDA about the contracts. So
crazy.
anyway,
That is always one of the fun things though about comics journalism is when you hear stuff and you get an opportunity to get it confirmed or denied.
right, and you just take those moments. That's one of those things when you have an interview or something. Sometimes you have to take those moments to ask one question for yourself. And
Yeah.
usually mine are very stupid, but I
Oh,
still
mine
do it.
too. Mine
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah. Well, we did the credits. Let's get into Spawn 61. What was the title again?
This is Sanctuary, which
Sanctuary.
I
Okay, I
get
get
why
it.
it's called that, and we'll
Yeah,
get into it.
yeah.
This comes out in May of 1997.
It just hit me. We'll talk about this more in a minute, but sanctuary is another word for chapel.
Yes, it is. I wonder if that will play at all into the events of this comic. One thing we've mentioned before is that we spent probably the first like 5 episodes of this show being like, who killed Al Simmons? And we all know
Yeah.
it's Chapel. And
He
as we
burned the
hurtle,
skull on his face,
yeah,
everything.
and as we hurtle towards, and that's become 60 issues in, that is something that we know until they just recently told us like everything you thought you knew was wrong,
Right.
and
That's a
which is
recent thing
fine.
they've been hinting at. Clown in the recent issue hinted it at him as he was dying, and his dying breath was like, you don't know what you think you know?
Yeah. And so, with this issue coming out in May, the trailer for Spawn would have already come out. And I'm sure that Spawn fans were like, this doesn't look exactly like the book that I know. But
Yeah, there's a few changes,
yeah.
one of
And
which we'll
so,
deal with in this issue.
yeah, exactly. And yeah. Anyway, let's get into it. We're going to open with a scene. The previous issues, Cyan had been kidnapped by a clown, and Al saves her and returns her to Terry and Wanda. However, Clown was disguised as Spawn when he stole the kid, so Wanda believes that Spawn took the kid. So they're speaking with a couple of detectives who are not Sam and Twitch.
No, two of the great Greg Capullo caricatures of all time, though, these guys. The shorter detective just has a face. He looks like a specific actor who I cannot think of his name, but he plays the private investigator in The Big Lebowski. Doesn't matter. Someone will look that up somewhere on IMDb. But they're great faces. And honestly, this whole sequence has some really great face acting and some really great cartooning from Capullo. Granny Blake is there consoling Cyan after the kidnapping. Clown didn't do anything too nightmarish to her. He just forced her to draw a bunch of drawings with crayons and then tried to spit cockroaches into her mouth.
Yeah, totally normal stuff. By the way,
Just things kids survive.
he does look a lot like John Polito. You're correct.
I mean, thank you for that. And Pierce, you grew up in Queens. Tell me that everyone you know didn't have someone try to spit cockroaches in their mouth at
Oh, it
least
happened all the
once.
time, especially in the
Yeah.
90s. Oh,
Yeah.
then
On the
Giuliani
train?
cleaned it up.
Yeah. That's right. Got rid of every cockroach in New York.
Yep.
And there were never any more again.
So they're going to be working with the FBI, hoping to locate Spawn for Wanda.
But they're not hopeful. Wanda's very
Yeah.
desperate to locate Spawn, thinking that he could come back for Cyan. Of course, we know that he's not going to do that, but she doesn't. And they're like, kidnappers rarely strike twice, much like lightning. They'll be likely be long gone. Not really understanding the depth of the context of Wanda and Spawn's like their weird embattled relationship, which is again, as always, going to be a focus of this issue. The cops are basically just kind of like, yeah, we'll do what we can, and then they kind of just dip. And
What do you make of the shadowy cops that seem to like be lurking in every panel?
well, I know exactly what to make of them, which is that they are the spies and eyes of Jason Wynn. And we find that on this next page where one of the cops in the background is lurking outside into his car to report back to Jason Wynn through his network of contacts that Terry is now alone at the house with his family. There are no cops, no Spawn, no nothing. And Jason Wynn basically is like, okay, well, then I'm going to make a priority of finding Spawn and we're going to make him disappear. And there's this little bit where Jason Wynn, who's sitting in a sauna, his phone is being held by his butler because this is in an era before cell phones. I was just thinking about this a minute ago, and I'll talk about this in a second. And the butler is just standing there, like his assistant, standing there holding the phone in the sauna in a full suit. And he says to Jason Wynn, "You seem to be quite hot, sir." Essentially, basically saying, like, you seem angry. And then he says, "I can relate." Because he's standing there sweating. He's schwitzing in a full tuxedo. It's a three-piece suit. But what I was going to say is, there's something about technology, like phones in particular, that always grounds a place in time, or at least an era of technology for our modern society,
Sure.
where phones as a method of communication always have to be dealt with in a story at this point. Like here, if we want Jason Wynn in a sauna and using a phone, there's got to be a way for the phone to be in the sauna. And in this case, the assistant's just standing there holding it.
But given that it's 1997, it almost feels like it could be a cell phone.
It could, but it also shows a little bit here, I think, of how extra Jason Wynn is.
True.
And how he's not considerate at all of this guy. He doesn't give a shit about anything. But like in a modern horror movie, I was just thinking about this. You have to deal with a phone. There has to be a plot point in your movie where you deal with the phone. My phone is dead. My phone is broke. There's no signal, something. It's just something that has to come up. Otherwise, a modern audience that lives with cell phones and modern kids who've never lived without them are going to be like, why didn't you just use the phone? I'm always like that. So anyway, just something I thought of off of this, where Jason Wynn is having the guy stand there and hold it, which is a common trope you would see in like the 90s, of course. Big Lebowski again, you'd have the guy delivering the phone.
You could always go the 80s Chris Claremont route, though, and just have characters never use a phone and act like they don't exist. And so
Well, they
that's
don't need
why
to. They don't
I
need
mean, I
to.
guess they don't, but also
They
it
live
would
in
have
a
been,
world of psychic connections.
yeah, but it would have been nice if they just let them know that they went to the Outback.
Right.
They could have just like let them know, like, hey guys, we did not die in Dallas.
But
We're in
wasn't part of
Australia.
the point of that they were supposed to, their death was supposed to be faked?
Yeah, but they
Because
could
then they
tell their
couldn't appear on the,
friends.
they could have told their friends and families. You're right.
That's
They
what I'm
could have been
saying.
like Peter Parker and made some kind of exception
Yeah,
once they figured it out. But everybody knows that's the thing about the X-Men, Pierce. Everything that could happen in the X-Men will happen at some point.
it's true.
So, getting back to another staple of the 90s comics era Spawn, we get back to Granny and Terry and Wanda, and they're
They're just
they're
going to
all
bed.
gathering. Yeah, they're all getting ready for bed. Granny's staying the night. Um, they're all so thankful to have Cyan home. And it says Cyan is nestled safely, comfortably, lovingly between mom and dad, each a soothing balm to the emotional wounds they've all suffered as they try to reclaim a house brushed by the hand of death. And like, I like the writing here. I like the prose
It does feel
in a
like it's
lot of
doing a
this issue.
lot. It does feel like it's like sometimes maybe like a little bit too much, but I think that that's sometimes what you need it to be a little bit arch and
It's a
like,
little Stan Lee
yeah,
where it's kind of just like, and lo, true believer, slumbering, whatever, like it's, yeah. I like Todd's writing in this issue. I like a lot of the language he uses. It does get a little extra, but there are times when it could go even deeper, like when we start getting into the worms and shit at the
mm,
end, where like it pulls back a little bit from what we've seen recently. And it feels like, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself getting to the end of the issue, but it feels like there will be some more stakes to what's going on with the worms and stuff.
yeah.
And we're going to get into that in just a second as Cog and Spawn have a conversation in the alley. It's a good old fashioned, you haven't done anything, you don't know anything. Spawn saying, just tell me what to do and tell me what to know.
And
Just
then
a good
I'll,
old tete a tete.
yeah, I will say to this point too, like we're a little bit flying through the book right now, but it's actually because despite the fact that not a ton is happening in the scene, the earlier scenes, the earlier pages, Todd is moving through like, okay, cool. We're checking in with Terry and Wanda. Here, we're going to get it
Right.
here. Here, like, good. Like you said, like those policemen were lurking in the background. That immediately pays off on the very next page. Informing Jason Wynn. And so then to cut in here, we have this very quiet moment on the page before. So to cut in here with the elsewhere in the dark cracks, bitch, like the
Yeah.
crazy sound effects, it's definitely the kind of thing that works a little bit better when you have actual sound, right? Works a little bit better in a movie or a TV show, but you can get what he's going for here.
Definitely.
Great.
And I love what he's doing, which is Spawn is staking the like burned out husk of Clown's blue, weird half violator transformed face. It looks like the Amoebix logo
Oh yeah.
for all my crusties out there. But he's staking it to the ground in his territory, basically as a trophy. And Cog is showing up. I love this little rendering of Cog in the folds of Spawn's cape, his beard kind of wisping into the fog all around him. And he says, so this is where you've come hiding now, along with your pieces of your destruction. And this is where they get into Spawn being like, I know who my enemies are. It's just taken me a while to do something. It's just taken me 60 issues to get up the nerve to finally go fucking do it.
Listen, it's only been 3
Because
months.
that's true. That's true. Todd released all these issues in 3 months. God, could you imagine if that was true? Um, the sweatshop factory of comics that would require.
If you told me that the current Spawn continuity was still set in the 90s, it would kind of work based on the number of issues, like how many issues it takes to move through time within the book.
Right. Well, and also to be fair to Spawn and everybody here, the catalyst for him wanting to do this was reconnecting with Terry in the last couple issues. They were working on finally getting their hands on the last pieces of intel they need with
Right.
Major Forsberg, who, by the way, disappeared here. I think he was captured along with Cygor,
That would
unless
make
he was still
sense.
hiding. But we
I
don't
don't
know.
think
We don't
he
get
doesn't
that.
get mentioned in this in this.
Oh, they did talk about Cygor with Jason Wynn. We
Yeah,
forgot about that.
he's
They
been
talk
taken
about it.
to a facility.
Yeah, he's been taken to a facility, and they're like, all indications are he just came to New York on his own for Spawn, and we
Yeah.
don't have any idea why. And it's like, okay, cool. So the creators don't, the readers don't, the characters don't.
Well, the characters
Anyway,
don't, but we do. Remember, we found out that Cygor is one of Al's military buddies.
that's right. I forgot
Yeah,
about
that's
that.
why he seeks
It
out
was
Al Simmons.
so long in between like those anything to do with Cygor
Yeah,
that I just totally you're absolutely right. Well, I'll go back on all of that then. We all know exactly why, except for Jason Wynn. So
yeah.
fuck him and anyway. Um but once again, just as Clown hinted last issue, Cog is like, you know, the people you think are your enemies aren't the ones you have to blame for what happened. Hell can manipulate your memories to fuck with your mind and to keep you on the hook to do their bidding.
If you're Al at this point, don't you think Cog's in on it too?
Yeah, I'd
Wouldn't
be
you?
like, come
Wouldn't you
on, man, what
kind
are
of
you
have?
fucking doing?
Yeah, like wouldn't you have to kind of like? Why wouldn't you tell me this before when I thought what I thought? Like, why didn't you? Cog's always hinting at something. He's like the kid in the schoolyard who's like, well, my older brother told me, and you have no way of verifying that information. So you're like, yeah, I guess that's true.
Well, to be fair to Spawn here, to be fair to Cog first, Spawn's not good at connecting the dots of what
That's
Cog's
true.
trying to tell him at any point. But to be fair to Al, at this point, it's starting to feel like, okay, Cog, every time we talk, you tell me I don't know anything and I haven't done anything, but you also change the rules of whatever's going on. Like, it seems like fucking Cog shows up when Todd needs to make it seem like whatever's happening is tying into something that's coming up retroactively. And that's what's
Yeah,
happening here again too, where he's showing him the worms. So Spawn says, "I don't." He asked Spawn why he hasn't seen the Night People in a while, like why he's hiding from them. He says, "Don't run, don't run out on those homeless fools who consider you a friend. They deserve better." And he says, I don't have friends, not anymore. And Cog says, and I pity you because that's also what Malbolgia wants, for you to become isolated and withdrawn. And he says, well, enjoy your solitude and your new friends here, holding up one of the worms that carry the sin and the dirt. And he says, besides being the carriers of man's sins, they've also been known to drain one's soul. But I guess you already know that. And guess what? We kind of didn't. But now, I mean, that does feel like actually for once, maybe putting something together that like has been teased a little bit. The more Spawn's been exposed to the sin of the worms, the crueler he's gotten.
yeah. We have it that kind of thing's been hinted at. It's just never been said to Al that that's what's going on. Malbolgia has kind of cackled in his, you know, place in
Right.
space and time about how the final evolution, Spawn's new evolution is getting him closer to what he wants to be, that he's been draining his humanity in some way. But Al's never gotten anybody. Like, that's the problem, is as much as I want to be frustrated with Al not putting things together, he's no real context for any of this. Like, like, for instance, the way worse version of all of this is that you have a character who, like, before he died, he was really into demonology, and like suddenly he starts putting together all of the pieces because they're close
Yeah,
to
that
things,
would
and
be
like that would suck. You just be like, yeah,
right.
all right, whatever, great, who gives a shit. Al is frustrating in that he is sometimes he doesn't have common sense, and that's the only time that I'm like, ugh, Todd, you're writing him in a way that puts him at such a disadvantage within the story. But yeah, I don't really mind this here. I'm actually happy that Cog kind of tells him something for once,
Well,
even
and
if
I
he's
was
being.
also just drawing that direct parallel of like the worms are draining your humanity and powering up your costume towards your inevitable hell demise.
Yeah.
Like it's connecting another actual dot there. And it is a bit of a needle drop for Spawn, and you can see that he's like sulking in himself, and we'll see that pose again in a minute because Terry is driving Granny Blake home. And I like their sequence here where she's basically just kind of giving her advice on looking after Cyan after the trauma of being kidnapped and saying that she really hopes that Wanda can find peace in it. It's a nice it's a nice little piece here that shows again that Granny Blake is just the kindest of souls and that Terry is also a very kind person. She says, "Lord bless you for always caring." And that's kind of the curse of Terry Fitzgerald in a lot of ways, is that he cares so much that he gets deeper and deeper into these things that ultimately complicate his life. Like his relationship with Wanda happened because he cared so much for Al that he got closer to his ex.
Yeah, kind of just carried over. There is a weird timing thing here. The last time we saw Terry and Granny, they were going to sleep. Then we saw Al in the alleyway. It is still night.
That's fair. It is colored like it's still night, not like the next morning. I kind of took it to be the next morning, but the coloring does make it look like she's walking in at night.
I had to be like, oh, I guess maybe it's just completely the next evening, like a day happened.
That must be it. I mean, that's, and we're no prizing it, as we say, coming up with a solution that's not on the page, but it's not the worst thing. Um, the coloring looks good. The hues
Yeah.
are nice. The coloring in this whole issue is pretty good. It's a little active at times and a little bit like it's got a little bit of that 90s comics, like we're going to do a lot with these gradients. But
In a way that's not too distracting, I'd say, though.
no,
And
they're honing it in.
yeah,
Yeah.
in a way, it's a pretty like straight down the middle coloring job.
Yeah.
It doesn't overextend itself,
Not
even when
very
it is.
conceptual.
Yeah, but it does take a few nice little chances, and we'll get to one in a second. Granny, even though she's old and blind, she can still walk a few steps without falling down dead. She kind of walks herself into the house,
Yeah.
and
Her little bits of independence that I'm
yeah,
sure
she's great.
people with disability are all too familiar with claiming.
She opens the door, and who's sitting there but Al Simmons? And she notices. I guess I don't know how she notices. It
Well,
says
I'm
she
sure you
senses
can't not
something.
smell this motherfucker
Oh
at this
yeah, that's
point.
true.
The cape alone, the phenomenon of cape sweat is well known to any cosplayer or anyone who's been to too many conventions.
That's a good
It's a
point.
specific kind of pungent, like, ugh. So,
To the point of the coloring, though, I really like the coloring on Al here, where half of his cape is kind of blue from the light
yeah.
from the window.
hmm
It's cool.
And it also sets the tone that he's a little bluebird of sadness right now because he is sulking on Granny's chair. And she says, "It's nice to have you visiting again." He says, "I'm sorry it's been so long."
He takes her jacket. Nice little bit.
Yeah, and I like this whole sequence where Al is basically he's saying to her, "You've become my last true connection to the past. Everything else is gone. And since my death, I don't like what I've become or what I'm turning into. I'm afraid that you'll find out find out I'm not where you think I am." He's telling her he hasn't come because he's afraid to visit her because he's losing his soul. This is a moment of that of him having that recognition after that conversation with Cog and trying to reclaim a little bit of his humanity
Yeah,
by connecting with in his own mind the last shred of it that he has. He's working with Terry, but that's contentious. He feels like that's Terry. He said himself many times throughout these stories, recent issues in particular, that he feels Terry has betrayed him
yeah,
by marrying Wanda. He went from being like, well, at least it was Terry to, well, fuck Terry, you know?
yeah. And to your
And
point about his sadness as well, even his speech bubbles have become more blue tinged, which is not
yeah,
something that we've seen before. He's always been a white or yellow with like that gray.
Greenish, yeah.
Yeah, but blue is kind of new, and it runs through this whole issue, which I think is, um, I think it's a nice little touch. Great job, Tom Orzechowski, as always. The
I
king.
love both of these pages here, both the splash page of him sitting in the chair and the page of them the first page of their conversation, where you see Spawn reflected in Granny's glasses,
Yep.
and there's he's taking her coat, and then that last panel, I love that rendering of Spawn.
Yep.
I really love the inking on his face. He's just sunken into his cape. He doesn't have the hangdog puppy dog eyes, but he has these. You can feel the palpable emotion of him being like inward focused and depressed and down and like sunken in on himself. It's
Yeah.
really good.
And to your point earlier about Capullo giving a lot of really great acting throughout this issue, the next page, the final page of this scene, um, where Granny kind of reaches out to him and says, I can feel how hard you've become. There was a time when I could sense only softness. Let go of your pain. Others need you now, like Cyan and Wanda. She believes God had a hand in returning her child to safety. You're now a part of that. And she reaches out for his hand, and she sort of motions. She's pleading with him a little bit to sort of
Yeah.
give himself a break.
He kind of
And
pulls
I,
away so she doesn't touch the carapace.
yeah,
And she says, you're a part of that now, which brings Wanda hope and courage. Don't spoil that, because indirectly you become a part of her faith. And Granny doesn't know how accurate that is, that he's directly become a part of her faith by being part of the war on heaven and hell. Like,
right.
she kind of diagnosed it there. And we
Love
do
this
get
panel of Spawn.
I was going to say, we get the puppy dog eyes Spawn real big time here with his creepy teeth. This is a great, great, great Spawn. His just this whole sequence is really well rendered. The coloring is pretty good. I would say it could be a little moodier and more conceptual. Like, it would be nice if Granny and Spawn were a little more cast in shadow. Like,
Mm.
they're kind of colored very. Granny's dress is very bright. But again, that also is a bit metaphorical. We've said
She
before
is
that.
kind of the light for Al, and so for her to be
Exactly.
colored a little bit brighter, especially as he's very withdrawn into the cape, we don't even see his face in one of the panels. Uh, you know,
Yeah. No, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is that we've said before, and we've talked about a lot, that oftentimes in comics, the art, the colors, the lines on the page are meant to convey more than just what's directly representative. And so, yeah, having her be brighter and more colorful and warmer compared to him, it does work in its own way. So I really like this sequence. And again, he's lurking outside of Wanda's house. She is.
super cool and normal thing that everybody should do.
Yeah, you always lurk outside your ex-wife's house
Yeah.
when you're dead. Um, and he is kind of lurking out there. Wanda's like half awake. You can see that that's kind of when he's leaving. And there's these inset panels. We see something's going on back in the alley. We see the face of Violator, the burned out face of Violator. We see some barbed wire. We see some sound effects of somebody, presumably building something.
Or
We
Zakowski really going for it here.
having a good time. Crick, crack, splat, bam, bam, schluck.
Yep.
Right on the top of that next page. But it works. It's great. And there's a lot of writing here, but it's not oppressively written. It is not overwritten to me so much as just floridly written. And I
Yeah.
like that. I like it. It's a little poetic. And we see the night people, we check back in with them. They're building Spawn a new throne, or fixing up his throne anyway.
Yeah. We haven't seen Bobby and Bootsy in a minute. As pretty much we haven't really consistently seen them since Spawn decided to go deeper into Rat City and was like morphing into his crazy form.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it's nice to see them again. And they're
Another
trying to
shred
do,
of humanity for him.
yeah, they're trying to do something nice for him. I like that Cog kind of calls out their exist, like their existence earlier, but I do feel like that scene with Cog could have happened right after this scene.
Right, it could have. It could have. I love this panel at the bottom of Spawn going, God damn it, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, that's a great
Lettering is
one.
great, but also the drawing is great. The inking,
Inking is
that style is really coming together. The way they're rendering his face and like getting those splatters and just bits and decay and stuff in there is really nice. And Spawn is telling them, as he told them before, I left the alley for a reason because the shit that's going on in my life and that's coming for me, it'll come for you too if you're too close to me. And I cannot have that. I can't be responsible for that.
right.
And I mean, he's right. Shit's just always washing up to his door, be it, you know,
Be it
the
Cygor or the
the
FBI
cops,
or the cops.
exactly,
Yeah.
or two kids whose lives he fucking ruined in Alabama. And, you know, but they're like just trying to tell him, like, hey, look, we understand that shit's weird with you, but we're all friends here. We don't like disappear on each other. We don't give up on each other, and we're not giving up on you. So just, you know, let us hang around sometimes. Say hello once in a while. And Spawn is just like, yeah, fine, whatever, and
Yeah,
sits on the throne.
they say it doesn't have as many body parts as the last one, but what can you do?
Yeah, because he was sitting on a pile of corpses,
Yep,
which I mean, honestly, still want
pretty
the
cool.
Spawn with corpse throne. Um, and so this is where things get really kind of weird and interesting because Spawn is sitting in his chair. He's kind of replenishing his necro flesh, and these lyrics read like fucking like I don't even like emperor lyrics or some shit. Like time becomes meaningless as necroflesh and living tissue open up to the ritual of rebirth, assisted by the worms who now recharge the costume's aura of sin, slowly pouring their essential evil over the symbiote like some ghostly syrup.
Ghostly syrup is really funny.
It is. It is very funny. But then this inset panel here, this whole page, Clown's creepy, burned out husk of a face is just sitting there, and there are like fires welling up inside the
The
holes where
eye
his eyes
holes,
should
yeah.
be. Yeah. And then there's this panel at the bottom of Spawn's eye and Clown's eye. And this clown face, maybe my favorite clown face drawing we've gotten just yet. It's just fucking diabolical.
I
And the
like that it's
coloring here
also
works perfectly.
and I like also that because a lot of it's bathed in shadow, it has the same sort of like it's kind of reconstituting itself,
Yes.
you know, which is
And
really
he's
cool.
the vibe here as the head is kind of reconstituting itself in the spike is very much like pig's head on stick on fucking Lord of the Flies, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Where
100%.
it becomes this like weird sort of invocation of the devil. So Pierce, did you study Lord of the Flies in high school? Was that a book that was part of your
Yeah.
curriculum? Yeah, okay. I assume so, but so we studied it too. I studied it when I was a sophomore in high school. And now here is how all literature is covered in the South. Okay. We're going to talk about Lord of the Flies just for a slight divergence here. And I'll bring it back to what I'm talking about here with this. And there's a reason for this. But all literature in the South is covered. And the only reason they cover creative writing books in most classes, like literature books, is as a metaphor for the Bible. And it will be used as a metaphor for the Bible in anything. There's a book called A Separate Peace. Did you study that one? It's
Mm-mm.
about two boys who fall in love at boarding school, and it's gay as hell. And my teacher told us that one of the boys loved the other one because that boy represents Jesus and he loves Jesus. Anyway, Lord of the
That tracks.
Flies. Lord of the Flies, I don't know if you learned it as any kind of biblical allegory,
I did not.
but we learned it as a biblical allegory, which is shocking to me because didn't you go to Catholic school?
I did go to Catholic high school, but despite that, it was fairly. The teachers themselves were often, if they weren't one of the brothers, they were fairly
Right.
atheist, agnostic, whatever.
Just
So,
not doing what
especially
Southern
the English
teachers.
department.
Yeah, well, the English department in my school, they were shoving it in everything. Everything was the Bible. But in Lord of the Flies, one of the things I remember, and there is a credible reading of Lord of the Flies as something of a biblical allegory, I
Sure,
guess.
it's just like Noah's Ark.
There is there's you could read Noah's Ark as something of a biblical story.
Yeah,
Um, but there is undoubtedly, though I don't necessarily buy it as an allegory for the Bible, like all things are said to be in Southern public schools. Uh, there is very much biblical imagery in it, like apostolic names, the sacrifice
mm-hmm.
of some of the kids, and of course, the pig's head becomes the symbolic effigy of the Lord of the Flies, which is sort of what the title alludes to, is the flies that buzz around the pig's head as it decays over time, and sort of represents the moral decay of the children that grow to almost worship it. Biblically, the Lord of the Flies is Beelzebub. That is sort of what that name means. It's Greek, uh, which is, of course, a form of Satan or one of the archdevils or whatever, depending on your cosmology. So we're tying directly back into this sort of almost timeless imagery of this like rotting head on a spike covered in flies, summoning forth the visage of some greater devil. In
Further
this
proof that the
case,
last book that Todd McFarlane read was in high school.
I don't know that he was thinking like this is like the pig's head and the Lord of the Flies. I'm not trying to say that there's a direct principle that's being like parallel that's being drawn there. I'm just saying this is like imagery that taps into this like deeper, heavier sort of
I think
ongoing biblical visual metaphor language.
I think I can kind of yes and your theory here, because if as the pig's head, represents like moral decay, uh, clown kind of represents the decay of Al's truth,
Yeah.
especially as the rest of this issue is going to sort of bear itself out, right? And so clown returning in this form, and it says the uniform's host lapses into a bizarre coma like state, so he's like tripping balls on worms.
Yeah, hell
uh
yeah, he is. I just snorted, dog. Tripping on Worms is definitely gonna be the first album from my new like sludge band.
but and even in this panel, right, we get these like bubbles kind of all around to show like, oh, he's in this like weird state of mind.
Yeah,
But
more of those
y-
computer generated graphics with those bubbles. They're
yeah,
sneaking them in
that's
every
that's
issue.
maybe the only thing that I could have done without. But then we're gonna kind of call back to those first couple issues, some of the imagery that we saw in those very first couple issues, Spawn numbers 1 and 2, where we're kind of like learning Al's backstory. And you know, Clown says, "What you think, Spawn? How does it feel to be completely at the mercy of others? You control nothing anymore, though to some degree you never did. The seed of your worthlessness was planted long ago while you were still in your mama's belly. You played at being some pathetic patriot. That didn't work. It only broke your wife's heart. And the ones you blame for your death, like you, puppets. And hell pulls all those strings any way we see fit." In a way, it is like, and this I really like how this kind of calls back to the very first issues of Spawn, and that we're sort of like circling back and sort of like being like, remember this, remember this, remember this, because it's not only the imagery, it is a little bit of some of the language here. It is a thing that he and Cog talk about probably like every 5 issues or so in some form. Like this is the conversation that they have. But it also goes back to the Dave Sim issue, that if the more meta reading of this is like, yeah, sorry, Spawn, you're like literally a character. And based on the big change that's about to happen, it's not in your control, and things are going to
Yeah.
change. unfortunately.
Spawn,
The facts of your
Spawn
life.
absolutely riding the lightning here directly into ego death.
Yeah.
And he is basically on an ayahuasca trip with no handler. Like, any of you have done any psychedelics with enough frequency or dosage have experienced very likely the phenomenon of ego death, which is where you confront your own nothingness. You kind of step into your own mind and look around and realize that it's all fucking meaningless and you're a speck of dust in time and space. Sometimes that happens to you while you're sitting in your bathroom in the dark and you can see math all around you, and you experience every emotion in rapid succession because you had 11 grams of shrooms. Sometimes it happens while you're sitting on the throne that the night people built for you out of discarded corpses, staring into the eyes of the charnel husk of the demonic clown who haunts your nightmares. And
Yeah.
in this case, we know what Spawn's finally experiencing after 50 issues, which version of ego death Spawn's having. Um, but it is, and it occurs to me really that Spawn, honestly, if we look at it, every single moment of this has been a metaphor for some journey toward ego death, in the sense of Spawn having to let go of his own assumptions about his place in the universe and his own comforting illusions about his importance to reality. Because once you've realized that you have none, then you can start to find ways to actually be important. But you have to figure out that you are not some controlling central cosmic figure who gets to weave destiny. You have to realize that your destiny is being woven around you by all the facts of your life. They said that's what Spawn's coming to.
And I think that also, I mean, that's a parallel to Todd's own journey within the comic book industry, right? That is
Absolutely.
him realizing, like, I want to be the guy in control. Well, you don't get to be the guy in control if you're drawing Spider Man. Sorry.
That's right.
Well, I guess I'll have to do it myself. And also then realizing, especially at this point, this is still before uh, print runs for this book are going to like drop off a cliff. But Spawn's not selling a million copies anymore.
Not much is. Yeah.
Nothing. Yeah, like nothing
Nothing
is.
is.
So for this issue to come out exactly when it's coming out, and I think also for Todd to have to cede a little bit of control when he made the movie in order to get
Yeah.
the movie made, right? And yeah, I think he's kind of in his way. He's really battling with this idea of like, oh man, who am I? What does this mean? Who's really in control? Because even this thing that I created myself, I don't get to totally control because there's a studio and producers and whatever.
Well, and also, you look at the dedication to the director of the film with what's about to come in this issue is going to directly tie into that film. It's basically Todd saying, like, I'm doing this because of this movie.
Yep.
And because if he didn't have to do the movie and have to adapt this into the cartoon and other places, it could have very easily, the character of Chapel could have very easily stayed as connected to Spawn's mythos as he was, even with Rob Liefeld. Because again, like you said, Spawn not selling millions of copies a month. They're not remaking Chapel action figures. It could have been a footnote in the history of Spawn. But, it's also funny that I say, ego death and that concept and the value that some people philosophically place on this idea of ego death is that you understand that you have no central place in the universe. The thing about it is, Spawn does have a central place in his universe. He's being told over and over by Cagliostro, you are an important figure here. Even Malbolgia is saying you're an
Even
important figure
God
to
said,
me.
"You're the
Even
one."
God is saying you're the one. But what he is, and this is a parallel and a parable that's been drawn in many versions of stories about quote unquote the one. What he's really learning is that he is not the supreme decider. He is the ultimate pawn. He is going to be used by someone to some great advantage in this conflict. Much like, I'll draw back to what you just said, Todd McFarlane is realizing that Spawn, more even than just his own character, Spawn is a pawn, Hell's Spawn. We've talked about that so many. That's come up in the text
Yep.
enough that it's just right there. Todd McFarlane acknowledging and realizing that he's going to be a pawn for other forces in his own world. Video
Yeah.
games, HBO, he's well into making that cartoon at this point, dealing with the realities of dealing with, of trying to create that. He's now dealing with the vagaries of the studio system, trying to make a PG-13 Spawn movie
Yeah.
that uh, doesn't matter what Todd McFarlane wants to make. He's not the guy doing it.
And even further than that, we saw in the letters columns on the early handful of issues that he's still full of piss and vinegar.
Absolutely.
Changes pretty quickly though. And he's pretty, he starts to realize, and he always knew this because I think he's a decent businessman, except when he's not. But and obviously his like toy empire is proof of that.
Right.
But you start to see very quickly that he becomes a little bit less full of piss and vinegar when he realizes that everybody that he's writing to are the people that are paying the bills. And so it's not that he's like taking their lead and making sure that things they want to happen. But I do think that Spawn is a book that dirtles a little bit because it needs to walk what he considers a pretty fine line of meeting uh, meeting readers' expectations on some level. There's a lot of pressure on it because it's Image's flagship book at this point. Still, before Image would kind of have a new identity as sort of like the leading indie comics publisher. And so, I say this. I find that we say this all the time, but it's always funny when we dig into like just one issue and we're like, oh yeah, I guess there's like actually like a lot here. um, Sometimes I think I'm quick to maybe not give Todd enough credit, but I don't know. The more we read this stuff, the more it's like, there might not have been a total plan per se. I don't think started writing issue 1 with like, here's how the first 100 go. But I think as the facts of his life have been changing, and as his relationship to his own creation has been changing, he's somebody who's not only learned to get better at his craft, but has also found ways to sort of deal with the stuff happening in his own life through the art that he gets to make, and through the art that he gets to engage with on pretty much a daily basis. And I find that very interesting, from his father-in-law's hospital visits, that kind of getting written into the book in a way, to even this big change that we're about to get to. We keep teasing it, but I feel like anybody listening probably already knows.
And we've even discussed it many
Yeah.
times on, it's really just coming down to this being the moment. And so to get back into it, and you're right, we've talked about from the first episode of this podcast, the first issue of this comic, that this is Todd putting everything of himself that he wants to put on a page and thinks should be on a page onto the page. His emotions, his philosophies. And I'm not trying to say, we've said again and again, we're not trying to suss out the politics of Todd McFarlane through the comic book, 90s era comic book political, flailings of Spawn. But you can suss out kind of the person he is and the values he has about his life. And that comes through on the page. And I think, again, when we draw back to that, this is something that he's doing because of someone else's values, in the sense that it's more valuable to him to have his own say, have his own character, and not have to deal with anyone else. It's not just about it being Rob Liefeld's character Chapel that's being cut out and Rob Liefeld that's being cut out. I think it's Todd saying, fine, if I do this, I can just have this.
Yeah, it cleans it up a little bit. As much as I thought it was very cool, because as I'd been reading Spawn, I also kind of went back and read a bunch of Youngblood and read some Savage Dragon, and it's cool that they all reference each other and they feel like a shared universe. And in some way, even though they are not super impactful to each other. But this was something that was like, Chapel killed Al Simmons. Whoa, okay, like let's go. Um, I
It's
think
one of the
walking,
kind of the founding connective tissues of like that shared image continuity.
yeah, absolutely. And but I think walking it back, especially as, I mean, at this point, Silvestri would have left Image already. He would soon be back, but he would have left already. Top Cow would be its own thing for a bit. Um, the Image founding fathers are, I think they are more legend than they are sort of examples of what you should be doing. I think like the legend of Image Comics has far outseeded the success of the founders at exactly what they were maybe trying to do at the outset, if that makes sense.
Well, none of the comics Image is known for now are the comics that it was known for when it started. Spawn notwithstanding.
Yeah.
Spawn being really, and Savage Dragon. Savage Dragon's still chugging along, but I would say it's less an iconic like Image Comics book at this point. When we think of Image Comics now, what I'm saying is we think of creator-owned titles that are
Yeah.
maybe shorter, or we think of that wave from about a decade ago of like Sex Criminals, Wicked and Divine, all that stuff that just really put Image back on the map in a big way.
Yeah.
So the whole company has kind of turned a corner. And there's some more parallels to the movie here. What's happening in the comic is Al is having this vision of Clown who is haunting him. He's saying, your memories, your thoughts, we gave some of those to you sometimes. Sometimes they're real, most times they're not. Let's try an easy one. Like, who actually killed you? Was it Wynn? Was it Chapel? Death has many faces, old pal, and just because you believe something to be, that does not make it so. Who was it, Spawn, who burned you, who torched your sorry little ass into oblivion? And we get this cool drawing on the next page of none other than, of course, Jessica Priest. Uh, and she looks very much like she does in the movie with
Yep.
the headset and the big gun. It's funny that the headset goes like up on top and over her ear.
Yeah, it's weird.
Instead of, it's weird. But in the movie, if you remember, they shoot Jason Wynn and Jessica Priest shoot Al Simmons down and then light him on fire.
Yep.
And that's what's directly being alluded to here is exactly what happens in the movie. Jason Wynn not necessarily there, but I love the way the smoke from her gun and the flame like kind of steam off the gun and the flame of his body falling into like the eye of the skull down there.
Yeah, and
I
the
like
skull
how
is
that
kind
all
of
comes together.
paralleled. It's in the same position as Wanda's face there too.
And Wanda's face down there on the bottom right is paralleled with Clown's face in the top left with their like
The
it's a
morning hat.
comedy and it makes kind of a comedy and tragedy there.
Mm, it's pretty cool.
So
It's a
so
fun couple pages.
that's the big reveal here is that Jessica Priest is the one who killed Spawn. And
Although she doesn't get a name here.
no, she doesn't get a name, but we see her. You wonder if she didn't have a name necessarily yet, but I guess she would have to have had the name by then. She would have to have had the name Jessica Priest.
They know her name, but
Yeah,
it's
but
not.
Spawn doesn't. Al
Spawn
won't
doesn't.
know that yet.
Yeah.
So that leaves Spawn once again sulking in his chair.
Because he's like sleeping almost.
Yeah, he's passed out like kind of in his trance. And Cog is just kind of standing there watching. There's one other revelation here, which is that hell only took Al Simmons to get closer to. Hold on a second. I was thinking it was saying that Jessica Priest is the one they're after. Is that what it's saying? That Jessica Priest is the one they're after? I thought it was saying that Wanda is the one they want.
That's the thing that is kind of confusing. It says someone. So they say, he says like we're connected just like you and your symbiote.
No, you're right. That is. Sorry, this is confusing me. Hold on a second.
Someone who embraces evil to its fullest, who lusts for power and prestige, and who is, in fact, just another of our countless playthings on Earth. We control her as we control you, and as we will someday control Wanda. She is our prize, not you. The answer lies with her. It is unclear if the answer lies with her and she is our prize are referring to Jessica Priest or Wanda.
That's what just hit me there, and that's why I was confused. But yes, that's what was kind of tripping me up there was that, yes, when I first read it, I thought, oh, it's saying Jessica Priest is the real prize. Then when I was rereading it just now, I thought, oh, wait, is it saying Wanda?
I think it is saying Wanda because then the next bit says, she's what hell's after and you are leading us to her. Although
Well, that
maybe,
could also be Jessica
yeah,
Priest, because if Hell wants Jessica Priest to be killed and sent to Hell, and they sent Al Simmons after her, that could be an easy reading, and it could be meant to be read ambiguously,
yeah.
because it's still a mystery to Spawn. I'm not going to say it's like bad writing. I'm just saying it's ambiguous, and maybe it's meant to be. It's a little bit of a like Martha moment in a way, like.
Also, I mean, I will say that the next captions do clear this up for us quite a little bit. In classic Spawn fashion, it says, so another piece of Spawn's unholy tapestry is woven, and hidden within its designs a few more answers, while hidden in the background, the possibility of 1,000 new questions.
Oh, that clears it right up. There's only 1,000 more questions.
Yeah.
And you
So,
know what that means? 1,000 more issues of Spawn.
yep. So, yeah, that's pretty much it for Spawn 61. I do have the issue in front of me, so we do have back matter, which is always
All
fun.
right, let's get into it.
And the first little bit of back matter is the blah, 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 where Terry Fitzgerald says, what's the word on the street, you ask? By the time you read this, the first few episodes of Spawn, the animated show, will have aired on HBO. They're on every Friday night at midnight. It must have been so cool to stay up late and watch Spawn.
On HBO.
Turn out the lights. The shows will be collected and sold on video and Laserdisc sometime in September from HBO Home Video.
Whoa, can we get a Spawn animated series laser disc?
That would be sick. And then the movie is screaming along at a blistering pace. The boys at ILM, banned from the ranch in Santa Barbara Studios, are busy cranking out the cool special effects. Actually, if you go over on Instagram to Spawn Archive, they have a lot of the like VFX tests and stuff for Violator. So go check them out at Spawn Archive. They're always posting awesome stuff. And just a little bit of update on the video game. They're still working on it. They have the Korn Dust Brothers tune from the Spawn soundtrack will be ready in a couple weeks. And then word is that Marilyn Manson is interested in doing a little ditty for us. And then there's a photo of Steve Caballero with a Spawn skateboard. So that's cool.
Wow.
And there's another photo that he just thought was cool of Jason Burke, who's 12 years old and a member of the Spawn hockey team in Detroit, which plays at a Pee Wee A level. It's just a cool photo of a kid playing hockey.
Bro, we can get Spawn laser discs, Spawn the animated series laser discs, cheap.
Really?
Oh yeah,
All
like
right.
20
Well,
bucks cheap.
We can write them off on our taxes.
We should frame it like a gold record.
All right, into the letters. We get, hi, Mr. McFarlane. My name's Tom. First time I've written to you. I want to say how much I enjoy reading your comics and will continue collecting them. I live outside Melbourne, Australia, and I'm finding it hard to find any issue of Spawn. My only way of finding the comics is if I go into the city and buy it there. That means I miss a few issues. Please do not be annoyed if I ask a few stupid questions. When will the Spawn movie be coming out in Australia? Will Spawn be joining forces with any of the other Image superheroes? Will the Spawn mobile be featured in any issues? And if it has, what issue was it? Will Spawn end up fighting the Malbolgia in any of the issues? Todd says, as things start heating up at Spawn headquarters, it will be interesting to see the demand overseas for the character in various products. Man, I have to imagine that Todd's just in a million meetings, like, about, like, the overseas viability
and
of
box office, and yeah.
Boy, oh boy. Hopefully some of the heat generated here domestically will translate to other countries, especially those with a different language who aren't constantly bombarded with comic books, news, and updates. Part of the interesting thing for me will be to see whether those who have no prior knowledge of the character buy into the character of Spawn based solely on TV or what they see in a movie theater. Then, if Spawn is to live a long life, I'll constantly be needing to feed him to the growing number of Spawn converts.
Spawnverts.
The Spawnverts.
That's
To
right.
that end, the latest info on the arrival of Spawn to your shores is January of 1998. It came out in the US August 1st, 1997. So we're 3 months out as of this issue coming out.
Boy, right before my 14th birthday. I think that.
Perfect timing.
Wow. Yeah.
No plans for major crossovers. Spawnmobile, for the most part, is just something I take around the country like a traveling billboard, and I don't really see how I'll bring it into the actual comic book itself. On some levels, that's Batman's shtick. I'd rather not step on his toes. And in terms of story content, given that Malbolgia is Spawn's archenemy, you can always look forward to a confrontation or two between Spawn and his maker.
Surprised he didn't call out Spawn 50.
Yeah.
Or was it 52?
It's like 52 or 50, 53.
Right.
52 is against Savage Dragon, and then 53.
That's right.
And
53
it's
is where he
actually
fights
interesting
Malbolgia.
that he doesn't bring up that, hey, he just fought Savage Dragon.
It's Dragon 2, that's right.
All right, well, there's
sorry,
a chance.
kid.
There's a chance that
this was written before those were released or something.
Maybe.
We'll see. I don't know.
It's unclear. Mr. McFarlane, get ready to print your FAQ. I'm currently entering year 2 of being the assistant to an actor. I won't say who, but will offer a hint. Quote, give me some sugar, baby. At any rate, the reason I felt
that's a big quote from 1997.
At any rate, the reason I felt my occupation important enough to mention was because he began his film as an independent filmmaker. Through forming a limited partnership, he was one of 3 pals who independently produced and held full creative control over a feature film, now a cult classic. It was this fact that led me to pursue meeting him, which in turn landed me this job. Because of him, I have enormous respect for the independent success stories of the creative world. My hat's off to you for doing it your way and doing it so well. My boss also... Who is it?
That's an Army of Darkness quote. He's talking about Bruce Campbell.
This is Bruce Campbell's this is Bruce Campbell's assistant?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
And the movie they're talking about is Evil Dead.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it took me a minute to remember that. I had to look it up, but once I looked it up, I was like, "Oh yeah."
This is Craig Sanborn. Wonder if he ended up becoming anybody. Craig Sanborn, who are you? Looks like he acted in a couple of movies. No, he was a location assistant for Dawson's Creek.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, his alternate name is Kif Kiffington III.
What?
What? What?
What? Okay.
Okay. Anyway, basically, he just asks about breaking into comics because it's like he's learning to write, and so he's curious about the format of a comic book script, and he has questions about getting started and how, because he's only 1 degree of separation from a few fellas in the comic industry, does he have a chance to make it? And can he send some ideas to Todd? And Todd just kind of breaks it down for him, and he's just very nice. There's nothing super... Oh, so here's one thing that is relevant to this issue, is somebody says, hey, Spawn's excellent, and they say that I agree Spawn started out as a great tragedy. I could emphasize. They say I could emphasize, which is funny. I could empathize with Spawn, pain, and being screwed over is something that seems to happen to everyone. I understand how separation from a loved one can affect a person. Spawn was human, dead, but human, and basically a good guy, or at least he tried. It's this attribute that makes tragedy work. Look at Hamlet. Hamlet's a good guy, a little depressed, and definitely stuck in a situation not of his choice. He's not a hero, but neither a villain. My complaint is that Spawn is losing his humanity. I no longer feel sorry for Spawn. He's becoming very one-sided, macabre, and twisted. Does Spawn even try to do the right thing anymore? If I want horror and violence, I can turn somewhere else. Tragedy is hard to find, and respect for life is hard to find. These are what I'm asking for in Spawn. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for your comments, Matt. Let's see if we can address your concerns. As I stated before, the toughest thing about doing a monthly comic is trying to keep it somewhat fresh and try not to repeat yourself too often. Okay, Todd. Although I agree with you on most
I mean,
parts,
he said that's the hardest part.
yeah. I guess he does. It didn't say I achieve this all the time.
Yeah.
Although I agree with you on most parts, there's a difference between what we do in comic books and literature. In comics, we have to keep trying to tell the story month after month, year after year, and in some cases, decade after decade. If Spawn was conceived as a three-part story, it would be far easier for me to keep the tragic hero at the forefront. But comic books as a whole must evolve over time, and so must the characters. So without giving away too much, Spawn is now in the phase where he's not acting very human and isn't such a nice guy on the surface, but that'll come back to bite him. It's just part of the whole setup. If you'll indulge me a little, every 25 issues or so is a phase in the growth of the character. Um, yeah, that's good. Next one asks if he is if he's I'll just read the whole thing. I don't know if you'll get this or actually read it, but I hope you get a chance to. Ever since I started reading and collecting Spawn, I've wondered what kind of religious background you've had. Obviously, there has been some sort of influence since your comic is about heaven, hell, and the final battle. As I've read each book, I've been overwhelmed not only by the great artwork, but also by the powerful storyline. A denizen of hell trying to do what is right in a world that is already full of violence and corruption, and at the same time, attempting to escape the clutches of his new master. I don't think this book is just a story. I don't think it's only for entertainment's sake. It is obvious that there are messages in your books, and I guess I just want to know if you have chosen a side or if you're straddling the fence. I like to think that you're rooting for the good guys, heaven. And as of yet, but but as of yet, I'm not sure. In case you don't know yourself, please consider fighting with us. I don't know what will happen to our poor desperate hellspawn, but when the end comes for him, the story and everything, keep in mind what our Lord said in Matthew 12:25. Keep up the good work, and I hope you see this and know I'm praying for you.
Imagine being the fucking dork who wrote a proselytizing letter to a comic book, trying to get Todd McFarlane to please convert to Christianity for Spawn's sake. Sorry to whoever wrote that. You're a nerd.
So Todd says, in all honesty, I'm not a believer in religion on any level. Ultimately, there are no deep hidden messages in my work. It's just me toying with concepts. Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? I could write about aliens. Do they exist? Do they not exist? I like to write about themes, love and hate, heaven and hell. Those themes intrigue me more than the concepts do as a whole. I don't believe myself to be a fencer. Quite the opposite. I'm quite active in my beliefs. Let me also state that I do believe in good, but I'm more concerned with what is the here and now. What I'd like to see out of people, if I had a magic wand, is that everybody's an upstanding citizen, regardless of what faith they believe in. To put it in simpler terms, I'm far more impressed with what I consider to be a good person who might be a Buddhist or an atheist than someone who is quite offensive but might attend church every Sunday. Given that I don't have any more answers than anyone else, although within the context of Spawn I can speculate, I can only deal with the answers I can control. I can control today and I can control tomorrow in treating people fairly with the respect and dignity they are due, and that is not something that comes exclusively from those who read the Bible. Being good is something most people want to be by nature, and if we could just tap into our own natural urges a little bit more, I think we'd find a lot more in common with each other than differences between those of us on this planet. Let me also state that I hold these ideas in my brain and that I myself am the first to fail at my own preaching because I'm just as human as anybody else. That is one of the anomalies of worrying about the hereafter. I believe, without any research being done, that if you took 100 people who are religious and 100 people who weren't religious, you would find the same percentage of people that are divorced, that are having a tough time finding a job they're satisfied with, that get along with their neighbors, and that are raising decent kids. The crises that we face today are inclusive of everyone who lives in this society, and there's no escaping the upswings or downswings of life. If you treat your wife decent, I bet you have less of a chance of divorce. And I don't need to read any religious books to understand that fact. To go back to what I was saying earlier, I think people should be good because it's the right thing to do, and not because there's some kind of reward afterwards. People should want to be decent just because. Period.
Well, I think that says a lot about, we talk about what are Todd's beliefs. I mean, he kind of laid it
Kind of
out.
laid it all out.
And, he says he's just toying with concepts. I think that's true. And I think he's also putting a lot of himself into the comic. I mean, I think he's unavoidably putting a lot of his own feelings into the comic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like, though, that when he gets kind of pressed with this, like, what do you believe thing, he gives a pretty thorough answer, right? I don't think that there's anything that letter writer could really argue with. you know,
Right.
which
No.
is great.
Well, do you think he was heartbroken to read that Todd is not a Christian
Hmm,
and therefore not on the side of good, aka heaven?
I don't know. Maybe,
Hmm.
but that's a question for
Yeah.
Lance Cinema, who wrote that letter. The last little bit is kind of cool. It's an ad for the movie
Oh, nice.
that's like the Spawn casting call. It has the poster. It has a look at the Spawn suit. Michael Jai White without the mask on. We see Jessica Priest and we see Martin Sheen with the bad dye job as Jason Wynn. Yeah, there's just that. There's just some like kind of generic text about it. We also get a an ad for Todd McFarlane's Spawn on HBO, which the tagline is "All hell breaks loose Fridays midnight on HBO," which is cool. And we get like this cool like 2-page spread
Yeah.
that is pretty sick with Todd in his Rod Serling gear, which is funny. And apparently there's a huge like Spawn billboard, like like for the show that's like gigantic. So
Oh,
cool.
wow. That is awesome. That looks like maybe at like San Diego Comic-Con or
Yeah.
something. Like one of the building wraps they do.
And then at the end cap, there's just some toys, and they look cool. Specifically,
Right
the
on.
Curse of the Spawn toy. And yeah. Oh, there's a Warp Tour 1997 ad.
Oh, wow.
Headliners
I
were
didn't
The
go to that one.
Descendants, Blink 182, Pennywise, Sick of It All.
Started going in 99. I think that was my first
I
one.
never went.
Really into a Warp Tour ever?
Never. Surprising a
Wow.
little bit
It
for
is.
me. And then
It
and then the
is.
back cover is the music of Spawn
Ah,
ad
yes, with that
as well.
familiar Spawn face poster. Pierce, we always ask each other final thoughts. And I mean, I want to ask you something different this time.
Sure.
Do you think Spawn is a better comic at issue 61 than it was at issue 1?
Hmm. Yes. But I also think it's had like ups and downs. Like I think Todd's a better storyteller at this point. I think Greg Capullo has really found his footing, especially over the last 15 issues, right? I think that we're not getting like the Houdini arc is always going to come up as like sort of the worst story, and I know it's not a Todd one, but like even Batman Spawn, like I don't particularly love.
It did have a little bit of a sag in
Yeah, there have definitely been ups and downs, right? I think that we get these like first 5 issues that come out the gate like, all right, kind of this is like a cool vibe. Like maybe not a ton is happening yet. I think with issue 5, we get to go like, oh man, this shit rules. Then it kind of lags a little bit. Then we get the Coco Swiss,
the Coco Swiss.
and we get another uptick where it's like Graham Morrison doing something cool, Neil Gaiman doing something cool, Angela's cool, Dave Sim does something cool. I mean, for all his warts, but the book itself is cool and very like meta and like whatever. The Frank Miller issues, whatever, but yeah, it definitely sags here and there. But when it's clicking, it's really clicking. And I think actually this is you could kind of read this as issue 1.
I asked that because to me this is an example of an issue that's better than that shows Spawn as a better comic now than it was when it started in terms of craft, in terms of storytelling, in terms of legibility. And I think that I was just thinking about that as I was reading this. Like, there is a maturity that's coming into the title in terms of the creative side. There's a maturity that comes into the writing when it seems like Todd lets himself slow down and just write a natural issue as it comes. Like
Mm-hmm.
this issue has a very pretty quick pacing and flow that gets to a point, like it gets to its point, makes a point.
Yeah.
Uh in a way that many issues of Spawn in times of sagging, times when it was down, times when it was not quite as good as it is here, there have been issues where we've been like, oh man, what's going on with all this text? This one didn't feel that way to me. It had that trademark like purple prose in a way, but it just kind of made me think this is a better comic than when it started, and I'm enjoying it. And I think that the creators are coming a long way every time they stop and let themselves take time to really craft a good issue. I feel like it does come together, and this is a good example of that.
There's an economy to the storytelling in this issue that doesn't exist in the first 20 or so issues of Spawn, and then only happens sporadically thereafter.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, in a weird way, this issue feels a lot more like issue 50, just done in a much more truncated form, right?
Right.
We do kind of check in with almost everybody. We don't check in with Sam and Twitch, but actually, that's the I actually felt like that was a great little move by Todd, right? You don't need Sam and Twitch to be that random pair of cops
Right.
because it would be distracting and
Well,
it
they're
would
also
put
not
them
cops anymore now, because they're
right.
private investigators.
So, it's a fact of the story that they can't be there, but
But they also don't need 2 pages of checking in with Sam and
of
Twitch in this story. We don't
right.
have to have that. It's, we can just have a story that, like I said, flows. Just this issue to me had a really nice pacing and a really good kind of flow from start to finish. And that's really kind of just it.
Yeah, and also like when I say like, oh, this could be your first issue of Spawn, it would probably work. If you saw the movie and then somebody handed you this, I think you'd kind of get it.
Yeah.
If you know, like if you were like, what's the Spawn guy about? And I think 50 might be a slightly better place, or 51 and 52. I don't know. But this kind of whole run of issues where not all of them have been great. And I think that in every it's fun to hear Todd say that every 25 issues or so are like a new era of the character, because it definitely feels that he thinks that way, and that like we're up for like some new transformation by 75 and some new transformation again by 100. And I think that that's if we're thinking about Spawn then in 25 issue arcs, there's something to that. And I would definitely say that the second 25 issues are better than the first 25 issues. Um,
Yeah.
and I think we're going to find that maybe this third 25 issues is even better than the first two 25 sections of 25 issues. So, yeah, I'm glad. So, next up, we're going to cover Curse of the Spawn 12 to 14, which covers the origin of Jessica
Yep.
Priest. And I'm glad
Our
that we
first
didn't,
dip into Curse of the Spawn.
yeah, weirdly at number 12. But again, we're following the Blake Whitlow guide to reading Spawn, who uh, put it as chronologically as possible. Um,
Right.
we
And I
did,
believe Curse of the Spawn is more like separate arcs. So,
yeah, and it's all written by Alan McElroy, who did the show. So
right.
another instance, look, I was saying earlier of Todd ceding control. Look, he's not even writing the only Spawn book right now. There's another ongoing Spawn book that he's not writing,
Yeah.
and that's I don't know. It's interesting. Granted, Spawn
It is
doesn't show up
interesting,
in it all that often, but
but it's in Spawn's world and it has an impact on what happens.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. Well, Pierce, I think that covers issue 61 of Spawn.
Absolutely. By this point, people already know where to find us. Do you have anything you want to recommend? Anything you've been enjoying lately?
Oh boy, what did I talk a lot about the books I read because that's something I do. I just finished the book Ringmaster by Josie Reisman. It's about Vince McMahon.
Hmm.
There's a very deeply informative and upsetting documentary series about Vince McMahon on Netflix right now. Watched that, followed it up with the book. If you're not familiar with Josie, she also wrote the book True Believer about Stan Lee, the rise and fall of Stan Lee. She's a pretty incredible kind of pop culture historian, journalist who has a real knack for covering these guys who are kind of demagogues of their own little worlds. Also, just shout out, she's a trans woman, and we love that. She's just a great writer, and I highly recommend both of those books. I think she's working on a book right now about Beck, who I
Hmm.
hope won't be like the trilogy of evil men kind of thing.
I
But
mean, he was a Scientologist for a while and
yeah, so
stuff,
we'll
right?
see.
So
But yeah, just I highly recommend both of those books. In fact, yeah,
cool. Well, while I was in Berlin, and if you're ever in Berlin, I recommend Modern Graphics Comic Book Store. It was really great. Very funny thing about going into. Because I wear a lot of Adidas. I guess I looked European, and so
tracksuit mafia.
I'd have people talking to me in German first, like not just assuming if that I was from out of town, which was nice. But I
Yeah,
was like, "Oh no, I'm so sorry, English." And pretty much everybody in Germany, pretty much everybody in Europe, it seems, also speaks English, if not
yeah,
a third and a fourth language. I spoke to
right.
a guy from India who was like, "Oh yeah, I moved here from India. He speaks, his native tongue. He speaks German. He speaks English." He was great. He wanted to hear so much about New York, and he just
Wow,
kept giving my brother and I shots. Shout out to that guy.
sounds like
But
your kind of guy.
yeah. I wanted to recommend something that was recommended to me at Modern Graphic. It's Blue Book by James Tynan and Michael Avon Oming.
Oh
It is
yes,
kind of like this is Blue Book, 1961. It's sort of a UFO abductions, sightings, kind of Twilight
yeah.
Zone-y thing. I've been a really big fan of Oming's work since Powers was a
He's great,
really,
nice
yeah,
guy too.
yeah, and also his Thor run and a lot of
Yeah,
stuff. But and Tynan kills it with pretty much every. It's October as we're recording this, so I was in the mood for some
something
stuff that was
spooky.
spooky,
Yeah.
and also picked up House of Slaughter. If
Mm.
you're a Something Is Killing the Children fan, it is sort of an addendum. A story about one of the characters from that. You have to read like 24-ish issues into Something's Killing the Children to want to read it, I suppose. But yeah, just Tynan's work is kind of
Right on.
perfect for the
And
era, and also Spawn, I guess. So
yeah, Blue Book. That's one, as I recall. I haven't read it, but I think, as I remember, isn't that one that sort of adapts or draws from actual like
yes,
abduction stories and
yeah,
stuff?
it's like
Yeah,
drawing from some retelling some of the most popular stories of UFO and alien encounters, starting with the infamous Betty and Barney Hill
I was
abduction.
gonna say. If
Yeah,
it's night, yeah, I was about to say, isn't that one about Betty and Barney Hill,
yeah,
which is a fascinating story, by the way, as you're learning right now. I don't have like a book to recommend on that necessarily or anything, as I often do with these things. But the Betty and Barney Hill case is so much deeper than a story about alien abduction. It's a story about um, really race in America and how people relate to each other when there is a barrier, not just of color, but of this vision of reality. And it's a fascinating and honestly kind of tragic story. So
yeah. It's,
yeah,
well, it's
wow.
wonderfully rendered here in this
I'll
Dark
have to check that
Horse
out. Good
book. Yeah,
recommendation.
yeah, yeah. It was a good one. I think that's it. If you want to follow the show, you can do so. Instagram at Spawnography, or on Twitter, but I'm terrible about updating it. But sometimes I do. At Spawnography Pod. You can send us an email at spawnographypod@gmail.com. If you have any questions, you want to tell us that we're good at our jobs or
Awesome.
bad at our jobs or whatever you want to tell us. If we've got something wrong, especially maybe I misspoke, doubt it, but maybe it happened. And yeah, it's so fun. We've been doing this for so long at this point.
I don't even know how many episodes, what episode this will necessarily be for us, but we're getting up there. I mean,
This will be
we,
36, so that's pretty
yeah, I
cool.
was gonna say we just released issue episode 30, so that was
Yeah.
our milestone issue. I keep calling our episodes issues, but that was our
Yeah.
milestone episode for issue number 50. And yeah, that was a cool milestone to hit. So we're on the road to 100, and I'm excited about where we're going. It's
Well, I think much like Spawn, we have to be on the road to 50 first.
That's right. That's true. We're on the road to episode 50, on the
Yeah,
road
on the
to
road
issue
to issue
100.
100.
Yeah.
But that will not happen until sometime next year. I don't think we're even going to get past like episodes or issue 70 by the end of this year. So anyway, please rate, review, subscribe on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's really helpful for the show. Recommend it to some other Spawn fans. Make some Spawn verts, as our friends at Regarding Spawn would call you. But we prefer...
Join the Spawn community.
There we go.
AKA the Spawn community.
Anyway, George, for Todd so loved the world.
He gave his only begotten Spawn.
See you later, Hellspawn.
Spawn!